extremely important for us in understanding. To get comfortable in our own skin, we need to understand our shame. So that we can minimize its impact in our life. Probably the biggest difference between me now and when I was suffering with all my anxiety and depression is now I know when my shame's talking. Now I know when my shame's coming up. And I can just say, that's crap. And move in a different direction. Whereas this before, that was a fact in my head. So, very important stuff. We'll talk about how, or we will now talk about how goals are very important for us in having a sense of meaning and direction in our life. And we need to learn to break our goals down into small pieces. It's one of the things that I need to do with my clients in helping them. The more I know them, the more I can help them. Because I want to know their goals. I want to know their dreams so that I can help them to break those dreams and goals down into pieces that are manageable. And once we break it down into pieces that are manageable, then we stop avoiding it. We can start approaching it and begin to believe I can instead of the default position I can't. Because as soon as we arrive at I can't, we're hosed. So we need to learn how to go about our goals in more appropriate ways. We need to develop an attitude of curiosity, because when we're suffering with a lot of our anxiety, we're being self-punitive. And part of what I want to help people to do is to learn to be curious instead. Now, why am I feeling this way instead of, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should be feeling that way? It doesn't matter if you should be feeling that way. Somebody said should before. Should is, if we live by should all the time, it's like we're shitting on ourselves. It feels terrible. It's part of being self-punitive. So we need to stop being so punitive and get curious. I want my office to become a place where people can sit and pay attention to themselves and recognize, oh, no wonder I'm feeling this way. Look what I'm thinking. One of the posters that one of my clients gave me was a printer, and he made me these copies of "Don't Believe Everything You Think." It's true. I mean, think about it. Don't believe everything you think, because a lot of what we think is absolute horseshit. Okay, so we need to learn to be curious. Part of the series, the treatment program that I provide, the lecture on shame is really evoking and very, very important in understanding subtleties and things that mess with my self-confidence. But probably one of the more important lectures also is the one on our rights. And I had right after 9/11, I never do a treatment program in the summer. I work with people individually during the summer, but people are gone in the Black Hills. Most places, I would suspect, during the summer. But that year after 9/11, I had, you can imagine what happened in my practice, it just exploded. And I had so many people needing care that I did a summer program. And in the program, I had a neurologist, I had a medical student, a couple of teachers, a paralegal, an attorney, a couple of housewives. But as we were talking about our rights, several of them said, I understand this. I've read this before, but I sure don't live it. And the difference between knowing our rights and actually living within those rights is the difference between living comfortably in our own skin and not living comfortably. We are perfectionists. That in itself is unrealistic. That's not living within our rights. So all of these rights are extremely, extremely important to living life reasonably, learning to have some balance. Kind of back to what Julie was talking about before. Finding better balance in our life. Any questions on that one? That attorneys would really like that one. It's not the kind of rights you guys like. It's probably the rights that your clients didn't recognize, and that's the reason they're in the trouble they're in. What's reasonable? Where do I draw the line? When is enough enough? All that kind of stuff. We talk about healthy sexuality in that following program. And I'm not talking about the birds and the bees there. Most of my clients know about the birds and the bees. But what we are describing during that one is our role models. For women, it's always your mother. For men, it's our fathers. And even if those people are not present in our life, they are still role models. And it's supposed to be from our role models that we learn how to deal with the stresses of life appropriately. Well, that one helped me to understand why I struggled. Because my father was a good man. My mother was a good woman. But my mother worried. That's the way she got through life. When in doubt, worry. And my father was a championship boxer in the Navy. So his way of dealing with life is just grit your teeth and hit them before they hit you. I wasn't skilled at learning to deal with my emotions very well and to factor that in and diplomacy and all that kind of stuff. I was a rager. My father was a rager. And the last thing I wanted to be was a rager. Because it scared me. When he would rage all the time, it scared me. And I saw the way people treated him, the way they weren't comfortable around my father. So I didn't want to rage. Well, the only thing that I knew as a child to not rage is just to stuff my feelings. And I stopped, and I stopped, and I stopped. And then something would happen, something rather innocuous, and I would blow sky high. And after a while, I didn't like being around me, let alone other people wanting to be around me. So we need to learn from our role models, how do we deal with life in a healthy way? And during that lecture, I kind of talked about different pieces of information that may have been missing, different pieces of information that may have been inaccurate, so that people can learn healthy and reasonable and diplomacy and all those kinds of things that make life pleasant. Doesn't take away the bad things in life, it just makes them bearable. Now, back to Julie's question. We do a session on conflict. I could certainly come back and do that one too sometime. I'd love to. But we need to understand the difference between anger and rage. Actually, rage may not have much to do with anger at all. It may be a whole menagerie of emotions: sadness, grief, loss, fear, feeling vulnerable in some fashion or another. And then we rage. And have you ever noticed when you rage, you feel so together? You feel like, I'm strong. But in the long run, you may not enjoy being around yourself, and nobody else enjoys being around you. When we rage, it affects relationships. It always compromises relationships. It creates tension in relationships. When we have healthy anger, we can actually grow closer with people. Because when I'm talking about healthy anger, I'm not talking about yelling and screaming. That's generally rage. But when I'm talking about healthy anger, I'm talking about just difference of looking at things, or looking at things differently. Synergy. But for us to enjoy synergy means that we have to also allow for compromise. And when people synergize, 2 or 3 people get together, 2 or more people get together, we can come up with possibilities that we can't come up with by ourselves because we have no outside stimulation. I think, to me, it's the whole point of being married. I want to be in a marriage because Otherwise, it's all entirely up to me to try and come up with possibilities. And with my wife at times disagreeing with me or sharing her own point of view, it helps me to, oh, yeah, wouldn't have thought about that. And she might do that as well. And together we come up with possibilities that we couldn't have come up with isolated. So, what are the 3 steps in healthy conflict? That's kind of what we go over so that people can actually grow closer as a result of conflict instead of feeling separated from each other. Does that one answer your question, Julie?
Well, I was kind of the difference between the raging and anger is what I was wondering about, and that what I'm thinking of is when if you're dealing with anxiety at work and that you're kind of keeping it together, so to speak, or and you get home and your kid questions you on
Anything?
yeah, pretty much how to wash the dishes or why can't I put that in the dishwasher and you blow up. I mean, that's what causes you to blow up.
See, and usually with rage, anger is constructive, but rage is usually destructive, and we can feel it building. And part of learning health is to recognize, it's probably best not to talk to me right now, and taking a few moments to be by myself and trying to figure out. I run. When I'm about ready to rage, I run to my journal so that I can figure out what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that way and a strategy to deal with it. Because if I just bury it, it's probably going to come out backwards. It's probably going to come out ugly. Rage is a reaction. Anger is a response. And when we live with anxiety, we're living life reactively. Part of what I enjoy teaching people is to learn to live life responsively instead of reactively. Living life reactively is not a pleasant place to be. This is really important, and I'm not sure how to emphasize it enough. Because there are several things that there's lots of things that I've learned over the years, but probably one of the most critical things. Remember when I did that thesis on alcoholism? And I didn't think I was ever going to use it much, and I use it all the time? Because you can pretty much predict relapse for alcoholism or for mental health issues in general, if you determine that that person is isolated. And what do I mean by isolation? That can be kind of confusing. My therapist pointed out to me at one point, Rex, you're isolated. You don't have any friends. And I thought, you are nuts, lady. You've been pretty helpful up to this point, but you are wrong. And she said, well, Rex, nobody knows you. So, I was extremely popular during grade school, high school, college, even graduate school. But it's true that nobody knew me. I would dance. I loved to spend time with people. But there's a difference between having buddies and acquaintances, people that I do things with, and having intimate relationships. And people who suffer with excessive anxiety generally don't have many intimate relationships. I didn't have at one time in my life anybody that knew any of my secrets. And this is how the shame topic is so important. When we live with excessive shame, shame leads to secrecy. And when we live in secrecy, we live in hiding, and we feel unique. And remember, anxiety is the number one condition. And if you put that in with depression, we're dealing with most of everybody. So it's anything but unique. But I thought I was unique because people go to their doctor, and the doctors love having me around because they'll come in and they are fearful maybe of some of their physical symptoms. What does this indicate? maybe I'm dying. For a person with anxiety, you can't just have a headache. That's a tumor. You can't just have a stomach problem. That's cancer. Can't just have a panic attack. That's the big one. So we're very creative people, but we don't, we do think we're unique. We go to our doctors, they give us medications because, frankly, the doctors don't have the time or the expertise to sit down with people like I do week after week after week and teach them these skills. So our doctors treat them with medications. And the medications may help take the edge off of it. I've got a 16-year-old that I'm working with right now, and she's on some medication. She goes, I'm feeling better, but I sure don't feel like myself. Well, I want to help people, if that's their goal, to be able to live life without medication. We don't need to be on medication for most things, except if there's a chronic disease like diabetes or hypothyroidism or any of those kinds of things that need medications that are genetic and have to do with the deterioration of our organs. But when I'm talking about medication for anxiety and depression, I wish I could actually ask you to hold up your hand if you're on medications for anxiety or depression, because it's a huge population of people. Because that's what happens when we go see our doctor. That's usually the first person we seek out. And they want to be helpful, that's why they went into the profession. But the only thing they have the time and the expertise to provide is medication. And we need to learn the kinds of things that we're talking about here today, because that helps us to deal with the actual cause of the problem, not just dealing with the symptoms of the problem. And medication does help us to deal with symptoms of problems. But it never teaches us to develop self-confidence. In fact, we become more and more dependent upon the medication, because I don't believe I can do it without. In fact, people that are exclusively on medication generally go on and off medication the rest of their life. So to break that cycle, we need to learn these skills. And once we learn these skills, it's really a pleasant way of living life. And our body produces all these chemicals that we get through the form of medication in our brain when we're living healthy, when we're exercising every day, when we're eating properly, and when our attitude is correct. When we think well, our brain produces these chemicals. Helps us to relax, helps us to monitor our appetite, helps us to sleep properly. All those things our body can do naturally. But once we start taking medications, then it kind of takes over the body. That's about that. I can't emphasize enough this issue of isolation. Whether you have a family member or a friend who's suffering with anxiety, or whether you are, I can guarantee you you're probably trying to keep it secret. And coming from it as a former sufferer myself, I didn't even recognize I was isolated. I had lots and lots of people in my life that nobody knew what I was feeling. And as a result, I thought I was unique. And that kind of uniqueness ain't a virtue. I thought I was broken. I thought I was screwed up somehow. I thought I was deviant. And that kind of uniqueness only leads to more isolation. Yes?
Is it important to avoid isolation beyond just your spouse or significant other? In other words, I've got a wife. It's important to also have a buddy or two that I really confide in.
I don't have something to erase with. I want to show you I want to answer that question, Dick. Thank you for the question. I wish I could use the whole board, because you guys are far enough away, it probably won't make as much sense. But we have this thing called a relationship triangle. And at the bottom of our relationship triangle, we have a lot of people in our lives. And that's one of the reasons I liked moving here to South Dakota from LA. I wanted to be, oh, thank you. That work? Yeah, it will be fine. I wanted to be a big fish in a small pond instead of a small fish in a large pond. Not great, but better than my jacket. Okay. So we got a lot of those kind of people. And they really aren't friends. They're acquaintances, or they're people that, when I go to the Ace Hardware and I see the same person week after week after week, I like that. But these are not friends. These are just people that we're familiar with. And then we move up the relationship triangle, and there may be fewer people, and maybe these are people we even hang with. We go do things with. We share our hobbies with them. But again, we don't really talk with them about anything personal. And then maybe here, fewer yet. But these are people that maybe we share one secret with this person, we share one secret with this person, we share one secret with this person, but nobody hears the whole enchilada. And at the very top, we have, can have, I'm not saying that you have or that I have, but I have learned to have people here, people with whom I have no secrets. People with whom I have some accountability. People that can ask me anything and I will answer their question, or they've given me permission to ask them any question. Or they will come and talk with me about this kind of thing in their life. Because that is what breaks the isolation. Who wants to answer that? Yeah. Does that make sense? This is important. I never had this. Most people never live their life beyond here. Those two levels. And I suspect, this may be my own assumption, but when I work with physicians and attorneys and some of us who are perceived in the upper echelon, we have a lot of acquaintances, but not a lot of friends. So there's a price that we pay. And at one time, if I'd have died, nobody would have known me. Now there's probably only a handful of people that really know me, but I don't feel unique anymore. That's critical. Probably a little thought-provoking as well. Somebody have any? We're dealing with loss every day. Every day. And to think of loss as just related to death would be unfortunate. Yes, of course, loss, death is a loss. But we've got a lot of rituals in our society to deal with death. But how about as we age? That's a loss. How about as our children grow up, don't need us as much anymore? That's a loss. How about as we change jobs? How about as we move? How about as our friends move? How about as we change careers? How about as we retire? All those are losses. How about as we develop illness? That's a loss too. People who struggle with a lot of anxiety generally do not recognize their emotions very well. I certainly didn't, because my dad dealt with loss. My role model dealt with loss by just gritting his teeth. Ignore it long enough, it'll go away. But part of what I feel fortunate to recognize is now I can identify my losses on a daily basis. And there's something available between people during times of loss that is usually not available. And if we can take advantage of that, some bonds really happen. You ever notice how people can develop a real sense of closeness during times of loss that can translate then into the ongoing relationship? But if we're the kind that just grit our teeth, not only do we lose the opportunity to get close to other people, we can lose the opportunity to get acquainted with that part of ourselves. And that's, that gets to be some of that stuffing again. And when it comes out, it usually comes out sideways through panic attacks, sleeplessness, worry, and all those things we've described before. So recognizing our losses is a skill. And if we can learn to articulate our losses to other people, we develop a sense of community with people, which gets right back to the triangle that I have up there on the board. How do we measure up to others? We tend to see ourselves in a one-down position or a superior position. And how do, relationship to self and being able to examine our true self is a very important skill. Communicating with self and others. Part of when I teach this particular session, people who struggle with an excessive amount of anxiety don't communicate very well with themselves. They are stuffers. They don't recognize the things that they've been stuffing.